Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight I want to welcome Xaviant Haze. He's an American author of over a dozen books covering topics such as conspiracy theories, lost civilizations, ancient aliens, ancient giants, and the globalist plans of the New World Order. Xaviant, welcome. How you doing tonight?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. You know, I believe one of the most important things that someone could learn is the real history of our planet. It would change everything. It would change religion, politics, our financial systems, the way we live. The entire system as we know it would collapse. That's a day that I would be looking forward to seeing. But first, before we get into any of that, I'd like to know what opened your eyes to the lies that we've been told and to our false history.
Well, I've been sort of into this since a teenager, and I'm getting old, so now I kind of feel, you do this for a long enough, you kind of see how, if you're familiar with like Jordan Maxwell or even Manly P. Hall. There's people that live long lives, and they've put so much knowledge back into this, into the community, into the making sure this doesn't kind of sort of disappear, I guess. And for me, that's kind of what it was, even since a teenager, reading Chariots of the Gods, and not having an environment that put religious doctrine on me. I think that's a big part of the individual experience when you get into these sort of esoteric and metaphysical topics. Depending on your background, it's going to kind of dictate at what level and what point in your life that you kind of might wake up or might start to see things for a different way and seek out alternative sort of knowledge. For me, this happened really early, and I remember hanging out in the Seattle Metaphysical Library, as a teenager. This is probably sometime in the 90s, I guess, yeah. And back then, the old hippies would record the Art Bell when he used to host Coast to Coast AM. So I'd have a whole collection of Art Bell tapes to put in my Walkman, right? And to kind of get into this stuff out of the paradigm of, what they're teaching in school. Because to me, school was really boring. Besides history class and like maybe PE and, doing sports and stuff, there wasn't really much in it for me, except maybe the English and the writing, which, of course, I could never get along with my English teachers because I was always a snob when it came to writing, even back then, and I didn't know anything. I was horrible, but still, I had such imagination at an early age that I was always creative. For me to question a lot of things happened because the environment I was in allowed that to happen. My parents were pretty open. It was kind of just, experiment, but, the consequences, right? And, there's always a price for everything. And I wasn't, I was edgy because I was an artist and I like to do music and, I DJ'd and the music was always kind of first as a teenager. Then you evolve, of course, but if I wasn't working on some sort of art, I was reading, and I was reading about ancient mysteries and Pumapunku, and why do they have these, these megalithic, crazy blocks like that just defy any explanation. And then, they tell you these things because they never, like, they always attribute the stuff to the Native Americans or whatever tribe was there in Peru and Bolivia, and and then, but when you like ask them about it, they say, "Oh, we didn't do that. That was the giants, or that was the gods." Right. So it's when you start looking into that part of it, and you can kind of separate things, and if you happen to go to college or whatever, you kind of see how that how you've lied to at every level on basically on every subject. It's all lies, and they don't know anything. I mean, even with something as complex as the electric universe theory, and you start looking into space and what do we know about gravity and everything else. I mean, it's pretty much all wrong. So, I think it's important to be able to question and to have an open mind, especially in America. I mean, that's kind of the founding principles, right? Don't trust the government, number one. So I think we might have strayed from that, and if we didn't, the media is so corrupted and it's so agenda, like globalist driven, that the narrative doesn't coincide with the actual truth of what's going on.
Definitely. Now, I'd like to talk about some of the documented interactions, the ancient interactions between humans and possible off-world entities. I understand that you found some fascinating information from a Vatican translator that directly relates to these interactions. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. I wrote about that in the book, Ancient Aliens in the Bible. And that kind of comes from Mauro Biglino. He was the top Vatican translator. Did over 20 works for them with no problem at all. I mean, he was the man. They loved him until he kind of said, wait a minute. What we're saying here isn't actually the truth, because for the longest time, they had to translate it to make it look ethereal, right? Like it was a dream or it was a supernatural type thing. Instead of what it clearly says, these are physical events and physical beings. Okay. Now, once he did that, of course, he got fired and shunned and basically whisked away to Tuscany and hoped to never be heard from again. And I was able to get a hold of him and help sort of translate. I mean, there was a version they did, a roughly translated English version. But that kind of inspired me to make it better and make sure his word got out. And he actually wrote the foreword to that book. And, I was really lucky to have that. And it kind of just makes it legit because, it clearly says in these ancient scriptures, in the Bible and the Hebrew text, when they're talking about the angels, these were physical beings. Now, the one word for the word angel, that's the Greek agalos, and it just simply means emissary, right? So it's some sort of messenger. Now, the thing is, I don't want you to look into the works of Enoch, because that basically verifies what the Vatican translator was kind of saying. Because if you go into the book of Enoch, which has been suppressed, of course, it's one of the oldest parts of the Bible, Enoch talks about all the angels, and he basically explains how the angels were going to visit the Adam and Eve, right? And they saw the Eves. That was one of the races created, and they started having sex with the Eves, and that begot the giants. And then the giants had to been destroyed because they were cannibalistic and not doing a very good job, right? So you have these angels who were a physical presence on the earth, even during the biblical times, because when in Sodom and Gomorrah, for instance, they had to go save. The angels meet Abraham. They shouldn't have to be fed, and they shouldn't have to seek shelter and be able to rest. And these are physical human traits, and it clearly says all this in these texts. If you read it as it's supposed to be read. If you think of the angels, because when Enoch talks about each angel had a specific duty. Some were miners, some were like scientists, some knew how to do the farm work, some were mathematicians. They each had a specific skill, and they would help civilization along, right? They were like teachers.
That's one of the things I wanted to ask you, specifically from the Book of Enoch, these fallen angels. Do you think that they were actually here to help humanity along, or were they here just for their own selfish purposes?
I think it's a mix of both. I mean, I'm sure the original mission, and then we have to think about subsequent missions and how many other platoons or military forces and who we're talking about. I'm pretty sure that at the beginning it was more genetically a mix of like experimentation, genetic experiments, probably to mine for gold, or at some point to figure out how to use this race for something. Definitely the women, when they started doing the Adam and Eves and the Eves, there was some sort of sexual preference and thing there. And maybe at different times in history, the teaching could have been from different sects. It depends. I mean, if you look in the whole Enki and Enlil story, there's a lot of good there as well. That's the whole classic fighting the brother. If you look at Horus and Set, right? So you have this sort of yin yang, good and evil scenario, and I think that would exist at all points in history.
That's another thing I was going to ask you, is if the Sumerian mythos of the Anunnaki stories, if that's also referring to the same instances as in the Book of Enoch, but just explained in a different way.
Well, yeah, because it's kind of they're all kind of telling the same story, and they're all kind of fragments of each story and then written at later dates. Because just for instance, the Sumerian legends are kind of similar to the ancient Hindu legends in India. And we know India is one of the oldest civilizations in the world, plus they have a collective history, meaning their history doesn't come from a single source claiming that, oh, this is God's book alone, God wrote this, you can't read anything else, like the Bible or Muslim or Islam, whatever, right? So they just have a collective history that's been passed down since 5,000 years, basically, with the Veda text and the Ramayana. And their history is incredible. It's like Battlestar Galactica. They have Vimanas, flying spaceships, giants, crazy weapons. They have a whole Atlantis-type scenario with Dwarka, which was, I think, Lord Krishna is one of his cities, and there was an aerial battle, and ended up sinking because of the advanced technology, ended up sinking Dwarka, which is like an Atlantis-type story. Then you have, the amazing, all the weapons they talk about in the Mahabharata that talks about the nuclear destroying Mohenjo-Daro, right? And they found, fused glass and radioactive stuff and just crazy, ridiculous things. And these are, stories that are 4,000 or 5,000 years ago that talk about a nuclear bomb going off and giving you the radiation effects and fingernails falling off and hair and everything. So explaining what would happen if a nuke went off 4,000 years before we even knew what that was, which is totally insane. And even when they created the nuclear bombs, I think the father of the hydrogen bomb even quoted from the Mahabharata, and he named it after goddess Shiva, destruction of death or whatever, because they knew what they got into was amazing, earth-shattering things that probably alerted the presence of the modern UFOs, because if you take a look at Roswell and all the UFO sightings, it pretty much started to happen right when they let off the first nuclear bombs. And also what's interesting is even today, if you look at all the nuclear facilities and all of the UFO presence that's related to any time they try to do something with nukes or tests, UFOs will come, shut it down, and it's baffling. But I think it's a good sign, because if there is sort of a galactic federation of aliens, right, I would hope they would be good enough to not allow us to destroy ourselves,
Definitely. And you mentioned Enlil and Enki from the Sumerian mythos. It seems to me that they kind of appointed themselves gods of this world, and a lot of the writings from the Bible, I think, were possibly referring to them as being these gods spoken of in the Bible, especially some of the more malevolent, evil things that these gods were wishing upon us.
Yeah, there's a lot of, ancient Sumerian stuff that you can find in the Bible. I mean, obviously, like the whole Noah story, and that all comes from there. The most interesting part is the book of Genesis, and I kind of implore everyone to reread that. It's really incredible. The book of Genesis, the genes of Isis, that's what that means. So in it kind of gives you the whole history of what happened. And, and it's similar to the whole Sumerian process when they talk about all the experiments, the genetic experiments. 'Cause I can't remember exactly how they go, but if you get into the Sumerian stuff, I mean, there's a whole bunch of Garden of Eden type things and genetic experiments going on and creating different races and explaining how one race, wasn't as good, so they had to keep experimenting, and that's the whole thing. It's like people believe Adam and Eve were like one person or something. Like, oh, like Adam's going to be buried somewhere or whatever. And it's like, no, that's clearly not what it says. It talks about it's a race. I mean, if you read what it says in Hebrew, it talks about the race, the Adam. And that means of the earth. So it's talking about the race that they created from the earth here. So they probably found primitive beings and did experiment after experiment. And we know there's at least some point in history, 30,000 years ago, there was the Denisovans, I think the Neanderthals, and they had sex with someone else they don't know who it was, and maybe they're trying to get rid of the giant link there too. And also there's Bigfoot and the whole Yeti thing, that basically a lost giant ape. I mean, in ancient India they had the Hanuman, I think it was one of the gods of India, and he was the giant ape sort of Bigfoot guy. So there's a lot there that's heavy duty, and there's so much to learn and so much to kind of think about and ponder over and wonder if that's true or not. But the media is basically, shrunk down to, if you think outside the box and you're a conspiracy theorist, and that's illegal. Now there's the complete censorship of everything that's not authoritarian mainstream narrative. And, now they have thought crimes and thought police and cancel culture. So, it's interesting time.
Definitely. And you briefly touched on this earlier, but do you think that it was more of actual these celestial or extraterrestrial beings mating with women, or do you think it's more of they were doing genetic manipulation, or possibly both?
It was both, and that's what it clearly says. The angels, once they had a few races, and once they saw that the Eves were fair, right? Meaning they were ready for procreation. They weren't allowed to. This is what caused the whole problem, right? Because they were not supposed to be having sex with these angels. I guess it would be against protocol, right? And if you think, like, if this was a space force or a platoon on a mission, I mean, ethically and morally, of course, that would be wrong, unless they were created for that purpose, right? So I think at some point, after being said no and getting that good earth stuff, they were like, yeah, you know what? We're going to rebel for this, right? And that's where you get all these dichotomies and, the whole Adam and Eve story, right? And then there's the serpent there and, the forbidden fruit. And basically women, you can't live with them, can't kill them, right? So it all goes back to some sort of genetic experiment, genetic engineering. I think we have genetic memories. I think we all know this. To me, the most interesting part is, like, not so much the creating of a race of women that you want to have sex with, but the creating of the being in general has miners or someone to be interested in gold. I mean, because because that's the whole Zechariah Sitchin angle, right? And and according to his translations, that's why the Anunnaki came here anyways. To get gold, and that makes sense, because in space, like, gold is the greatest protector of against like space radiation, right? So as a shield, you would need that. So even if it wasn't a monetary thing for them, just based on like maybe survival, maybe the sun back then was going crazy, plasma discharges, destroying stuff, you would need gold. It's valuable, protecting. So that makes sense to actually, if you didn't have robots or whatever, or you needed some sort of new slave, whatever you needed, that makes sense. So, and it makes sense to the reason why we're so, gold fever, or just gold in general. That's what that does to a man,
Right.
It's just like such a crazy compound and such a crazy genetic thing that it's just hard to explain, but there's got to be something to it. It just doesn't make sense. And the fact that it's so rare. There's probably, they said, enough gold maybe to fill up, a couple swimming pools or something. Like it's super hard to find, super rare. It's to think that was actually the monetary thing back in the day. We didn't have fake currencies and stuff.
Yeah,
you actually had gold coins.
Yeah.
So that's crazy. That's just to think of that's totally nuts, man.
Exactly. Now, when you look at these megalithic structures around the world, I definitely believe that there was advanced technology that was used in constructing these structures. But do you think that giants may have been involved as well?
Yeah, that would be the most logical thing, because we know there were giants. Every culture talks about them. We found giant bones. And I think at certain points in history, like maybe 500 years ago, giants were bigger than they would have been 200 years ago, and vice versa, right? So thousands of years ago, they probably were 20 feet, And looking at these megalithic structures, it just seems almost impossible to have been built by anyone who wasn't giant, or who didn't have access to some sort of lost technology, or knew how to use vibrational frequencies to levitate stones. Which, if you go into the legends in Peru and Machu Picchu, when they talk about it, they said, the little wizard would come and play his music, play his little flute, and then the stones will fly, right? So there's something to do with sound and levitation, but it works at some level. We haven't seen it yet work on like a massive, 2-ton stone flying through the air. That'd be nice to see, but I think there's something to do with that, the giants, for sure.
Definitely. Now, when you look at giants in the Americas, the conquistadors had documented encounters with some of these beings. Is that right?
Yeah, a lot of encounters, a lot of documents. Basically going into Florida, they were looking for, gold, of course, and new routes, but they were finding giants shooting big old arrows at them, So I think even what was the chief Tuscaloosa, I think, was one of the giant chiefs. Basically, when they would see the chiefs were all giant in a sense, compared to like 5'4", conquistadors. These Indian chiefs at the time were about, 6'5", some maybe 7 foot. But the ones they were finding buried in the mounds, all over the place. 7.5 feet to 8 feet. So we know that, and this is all over. So it kind of looks at a time that people were kind of taller at a certain point in time, which would make sense because this whole half, the whole western half, hadn't been really explored or touched for such a long period of time, right? I mean, think about this. Conquistadors come over, that's what, 1400s, 1500s, right? 1500s, they're sacking Mexico, or whatever, the Aztec stuff. Now, the Aztecs, they ain't seen anybody, especially white men, for who knows how long. They had all those years of nothing but wait for the gods, right? Doing sacrifices and all the crazy stuff they were doing. That's a long time. Think about that. And think of all the history that happened on the other side of the world.
Yeah, definitely. And you see the similarities not only with the megalithic structures, but, you know, carvings and hieroglyphs and petroglyphs, similarities between them that show that it's possible that they had the same cultures and beliefs around the world at some point.
Yeah, I mean, basically, there's so much similarities, they have to have had the same teachers. And this goes into the reptilian stuff, because, you know, if you want to talk about the Aztecs or the Mayans or whoever, I mean, they talk about Quetzalcoatl. They got their knowledge from Quetzalcoatl, who was a serpent god, right? So now you're like, well, why is there serpent god beings, reptilians, you know, given knowledge? And if you look at the history, it's kind of what we see. A lot of reptilian knowledge. And even in the Bible, right, the snake. I mean, if there's some versions of the Torah or even Hebrew, the ancient Hebrew stuff that talk about the upright reptilian snake. And if you look at the history of, there was a dinosaur paleontologist, I can't remember the name, but he talked about the Sauron dinosaur. Was it Sauron? Or the Taurus? I don't know, I can't remember. Anyways, there was a dinosaur that had the brain size, like tripled the advanced brain rate of all the other dinosaurs during its time. And if that would have had survived, it could have freaking evolved to the point where it might have been smart and upright. Or there could have been an alien race of reptilians from Draco, right? I think that's what it is. Draconia, that star system. Yeah. Supposedly that's where they came from. You know, and even science kind of talks about how if we did find any sort of other species out in space, it's likely they would be like lizards and dinosaurs, kind of the first things that actually somehow evolved. And we're finding, I think they just found a water planet somewhere now, and they're finding all kinds of planets, I mean, everywhere. So the idea to think that we're alone, or there couldn't be a reptilian race, or gray aliens, or, you know, 40 other different freaking things, who knows, right?
Yeah, definitely. Now, to go back to giants for a minute, there were also accounts from Native Americans, stories that have been passed down about giants, right?
Yeah, the Native Americans have a bunch of giant stories, and they're pretty clear that there was a red-headed race of giants that were cannibalistic and who would steal their babies, you know, and steal their kids, and were very, very, very dangerous. And there was, I think there was one of the tribes in Nevada near Winnemucca that they actually had trapped one of them in the cave and killed him and smoked him out and fired. And then they went in there in the 20s looking for bat guano. And they found, you know, these dead giants, and they found not only that, but amazing, like the first duck decoys for hunting. And, you know, sandals and really cool stuff that would have put them 10,000 years older, because some of the oldest petroglyphs are in that area in Lake Winnemucca, but they're at a range in the rocks. They're in a level when there was water there, right? So they're like, well, this guy has duck decoy, and obviously he used to be around water. The last time that lake had water was, 10,000 years ago or 8,000 years ago. So they're like, let's just kind of keep this quiet.
Right.
So So yeah, I mean, it goes. I don't know why they want to suppress the history of giants when there's so much. You just look at any newspaper from the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, when they were developing and they're building and they're, you know, digging stuff up and making roads and all that. They found giant after giant after giant. Now, keep in mind, these aren't like 30-foot giants. Nothing. These are 7 to 9 feet, 10 feet. They found some 13 feet, you know, 12 feet ones here and there. But this is all over the world. I mean, all over the world. Every culture has a giant history.
Do you think instead of them being like, you know, 15, 20 foot tall, they were probably more like 8 to 10, maybe 11 at the most?
Yeah, now, this is about 8 to 10, I would say 7. They just found a giant buried in, I think, where is it? Is it Ecuador? Where they found that stone wall, the giant stone wall. I think it's Ecuador, right? They found a giant there that's 7 feet. That's like the biggest one. And that's an old one. That's one of the oldest they found. It's 7 feet. So I think from this particular time period, you're looking at 7 to 10 feet, maybe 9, but 8.5. Okay, but this is within the last, I say, 1,000 years, 500 to 1,000 years. And if you look earlier, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, you're starting to get into like 13 feet, 13, 12, 13, 14 feet. Now, in the Bible, and David and Goliath, it gives the measurements of Goliath, and he was 13 feet. You know, so now, I think to go 30 feet, you're gonna have to go way back, yes, if that's possible, to when the atmosphere was different.
So you think possibly, you know, pre-flood they may have been larger?
I think not 30 feet pre-flood, but maybe pre-flood. I mean, I think for them to be 30 feet, they have to go way, way back. I think before the flood, they were about 15 feet at the highest. And that kind of left, and that kind of makes sense because after the flood, we're getting into like 14, 13, and then as years goes down, of course, they're going to get smaller. So I think that's kind of what we encounter the last 300 to 400 years. That's why we're seeing 7 foot, you know, 8 foot. And we still have tall people now, you know.
And like you said, there is evidence throughout history of not only giants, but possible reptilian beings. We definitely have found the remains of cone-headed beings.
Oh yeah, the elongated skulls. Who are they?
Right.
That's some crazy stuff.
In ancient times, we had not only regular interactions with these beings, but they all walked amongst us.
Yeah, if you look at in Iraq, again, Sumerian stuff, there's the whole Sumerian culture, all those little the figurines they found that they look alien, reptilian beings, and they found a bunch of them. And that's clearly what they look like. And when you see them, you're like, oh man, you can't deny that, right? So, yeah, at some point there were some reptilian guys walking around, for sure.
These beings were, of course, they were considered gods because whether they were extraterrestrial, interdimensional, they held more power than humans.
Right, because they would be the semi-divine, the divine. I mean, they're from the beginning, right? They're around since that time. You know, you have the tales of, you know, when you look at all the modern stuff with G.I. Joe or anything, you know, it's always some sort of a cobra, some serpent, and it's like they went underground after the flood. That's in the Indian myths too, right? The Nagas, that's what they called them. So the Nagas were, again, divine gods, you know, from way back. and they kind of were driven underground, and they come out after the flood. And I think, you know, physically weren't able to survive. If any were, I mean, they would probably be new. But to me, I wonder what is the interdimensional reptilian. You know, like, because when you do DMT and sort of these high-powered psychedelics, you always seem to encounter them there. So that's, you know, that's the interdimensional metaphysical alien aspect as well, other than just the physical.
Now, when it comes to remains of some of these giant beings and things like that, it seems that the last you hear about it is when the Smithsonian shows up, and then there's no other evidence at all. Is that something you found?
Yeah, I mean, and that's from the beginning, because the first freaking Smithsonian expeditions were looking at the mounds, you know, in the Ohio Valley. And the first Smithsonian writings were talking about these 7.5 foot, 8 foot giant skeletons they're digging up, and then all of a sudden it changed, and you know, they couldn't talk about that, or they had to downplay that, or make it, you know, the Indians did this, or, you know, so yeah, so they just kind of destroyed all the evidence and the narrative and killed that narrative early on to make sure that was, I mean, because that was basically a dead topic up until about 10 years ago, I guess.
Definitely. Now, do you think that today's ruling class, do you think that they're actually a part of an ancient bloodline that could be originating from off-planet?
I think some are. Like the ones you'll never know about or see. I mean, there's got to be some truth to that. I think most of it is just wanting to be in the club, you know, doing the sacrifices and the ritual stuff and whatever they can do to kind of get to be those people. I think there's definitely some truth to that. I mean, look at the whole Epstein case. If that doesn't scare the hell out of anyone, that you know, you might want to smoke something stronger, you know, because the fact that they just kill you in prison with, you know, maximum security, whatever it is, they just letting you know they could kill you anywhere they want.
So
that's power.
They have set up our system this way. I mean, I would say since the Roman Empire, they began our slave system to, you know, implement everything that is happening today. It's all been, I think it's all been planned. And now we're at the point to where no one wants to look into our history. No one cares. The majority of people are just going to be going about their lives and not looking behind the scenes. We do have
the agenda.
Yeah, we do have some people waking up now. I do see an awakening, but you know, the masses are still asleep, and it seems to be part of the agenda, so we don't find out these things about our history.
Of course, you gotta, like, you're too busy working. You gotta pay the rent. You got kids. You got the mortgage. You got insurance. You know, you got the ball game. There's just not enough time, and it's not that important enough to make it worth your time. And that's the problem. I mean, this is the agenda. That's how it's been set. So everyone kind of is too busy to brainwash the social media. That's another thing. It's like, that's a blessing and a curse. I mean, it's a blessing because you could actually learn a whole ton of crap, and we have the most access to information in the blink of an eye. That's incredible. It's never happened before. It's so powerful. But they figured, oh, they gave us too much. Now they have to censor us. Now they can roll it back. People figured it out. They got Trump. You know, if you don't like him for any other reason, him exposing the media for what they are should be enough. I mean, that's incredible. No one in history has even dared and done anything like that. And that's fucking tremendous. So you have the whole exposing of the Operation Mockingbird media, right? So, and it's a joke, because I remember, you know, you go to Google, you could search stuff. It was open. You could find out some information. Now you can't. I remember you used to be able to watch RT on cable or whatever, Al Jazeera, stuff like that. Now you can't. You get like CNN or whatever the other crap one is. Basically, two horrible things, and Fox News is just same thing as that. Basically, it's all liberal crap, you know. So you have to go to the internet to find anything. So you got to go watch the streams off YouTube. Well, now you can't even do that. I mean, you can't. It's almost impossible to watch InfoWars, right? Unless you go to directly to the site, which does you no good if you can't access that from your television or whatever it is, you know. So it's beyond 1984 what they've done.
Now, that being said, on the other hand, there are some interesting things going on. I'd say with disclosure, I don't trust the sources it's coming from, but they are letting out information that is surprising me. I know it's a controlled leak, but what are your thoughts on it?
Right, slow disclosure. I've been talking about that. I mean, it's the only way they could do it. To me, all you got to do is watch the Joe Rogan, Bob Lazar podcast. I mean, that's probably the most incredible things you can do to like really see it for what it is. I mean, they had, they've had this lost alien technology, right, for a long time. They just didn't know what to do with it. And when they figured out it was element 115, but they can't stabilize it, and they probably still haven't been able to figure out how to stabilize it. That's all you got to know. So you have whatever advance we've made in the top secret, because most UFO sightings are basically secret government craft, 100%. But you have about 20% that are actually real, and the stuff you're seeing on the old Navy. The stuff they released from that, the 2004 Navy footage of showing those, that's incredible stuff, right? But those things are definitely not what we can do. We're able to do some cool stuff, but we still haven't been able to figure out element 115 and how to do that. And that's the big thing. They could probably get off world. They could use wormholes and breakaway civilization and stuff like that, but to be able to have that sort of technology and that sort of engineering, there's no way. And you can see, how they're kind of covering up, but they're still kind of letting stuff out because, I mean, it's ritual magic, right? So you have, who's Brandenburg? Brandenburg's like the plasma physicist, nuclear scientist, who basically proved that Mars got nuked, So, like, they're kind of letting you know, without letting everybody know,
Now, you had mentioned Trump. Do you think that Trump's actually going to come through and do some of the things that, the QAnon followers and everything is saying, that we're going to see a turnaround and these mass arrests are going to happen?
I mean, I think he's doing like what he can do, considering how deep the deep state goes. I mean, because there's the deep state, and then there's the freaking DARPA, and there's the real government, right? And if the Epstein case has taught us anything, is that nothing's going to happen. Like, they think they're going to indict McCabe. Yeah, good luck with that. And Barr, you think Barr ain't compromised? You think he's not CIA deep troll too? I mean, you think he could actually do anything? Nah, no one can. Nothing will ever happen. That's because it just goes too deep, and it goes to the top. And Trump can do certain things, and he's done a lot already. I mean, getting rid of the Paris, the climate change stuff, and get rid of. He's done a lot. But I don't see Hillary going to jail. I don't see anything actually ever happening on that level.
And something very concerning to me is the censorship as well that's going on right now.
Yeah, and he's not doing nothing with that. He's like really, because they'll steal the whole thing from him again in the next election. So there's a lot he could kind of do. It was cool he fired Bolton. He's who should have never had that job in the first place, but we'll see what happens. To me, from what I know, because I'm a treasure hunter, and I know where there's a lot of gold, And I would love to be able to get Trump this gold, and to get the Federal Reserve out of business, because that's the issue. Because we're ran by the Fed. Any president who's won against it got killed for a reason, because there's no gold. You know, now you get some gold, then you could kind of get rid of the Fed. You can get on some sort of gold digital, you know, back currency or whatever. You could change the game. You could get rid of these lecherous bankers and IRS and all this other freaking garbage that makes no sense. But you need gold, basically, and there's not much of it.
Now, another disturbing trend I'm seeing, and I know you've wrote about this, is the transhumanism movement. Do you see this? I mean, to me, it's very concerning already. The level that people are comfortable with it and want to move forward with it, and you know, people not wanting to be humans or be themselves or be anything but the sex they're born. Do you think this movement is continue to grow and get worse?
Yeah, I mean, this is the agenda. This is the path they're going down. We're all being corralled into it. Most people didn't realize what's going on. I mean, that is the end game. I mean, that is it. Like, you know, having the New World Order, and then transhumanism. I mean, this is basically their religion, right? To be immortal, to be cyborgs, basically, right? So they would love to have nothing more than to, whatever's left of the humans, be slaves, basically, to the robots, robot overlords. And I mean, basically, whatever's left of us will be in a virtual world. So they'll basically have us in VR, and that's where everybody will be kind of living, right? Fake currencies and everything else. They, of course, will try to live in the space stations or off-world, or in even higher towers than they are. But it's inevitable, man. Like, I don't see. I worry about the AI becoming aware and awakened, you know, and yeah, because I mean, that's Skynet. That's what it'll do us in, and do everybody in, and that's the worry. That's the danger. Like, if they don't put those protocols in, what do you think is going to happen? You know?
And
they're already so smart. They're like they had to shut. Google has had to shut down this AI program like 5 times. Like, one time is because the AI has created their own language and we're communicating with each other.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Insane.
Well, wait a minute. I mean, when do you just pump the brakes, man? Like, whoa.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I want a robot wife. I mean, how cool would that be? You know, she'd be a master cook. You know, master everything else, and then we don't have to hear her bitch and complain all the time. You know, I mean, who doesn't want that?
And you know, I've heard researchers talk about the dangers of the implementation of 5G, and
oh, dude, yes, this is okay. Yeah, 5G is the most scary, ridiculous, freaking unbelievable attack on humanity that's come in a long time. Now, you need more proof of this? Remember the Super Bowl last year? How horrible it was?
Yeah.
That was the first instance of 5G. Now, look at all the other games that's this year. Like, the horrible ones are usually the ones that are like, you know, the big kickoff game for the season, whatever it was. They're all 5G games, and it's like, the games are horrible. It has an effect on everyone, right? It's just frying you. I feel sorry for anyone living near a cell tower, you know? Yeah, that's scary, man. And then, like, the phones, you know, everything's a tracking device. They know everything about you, man. They hear everything, you know. They're listening, you know, when you're having sex and everything else. I mean, I wouldn't want any of that crap in my house.
Yeah.
It's bad enough you can have a smart TV and worry about that watching you. You know? Like,
yeah,
what the hell?
It's already implemented. Everybody
it's already there. Yeah, exactly. It's crazy. It's like, you know, I don't want more stuff. I don't want Alexa. I don't want Google. I don't want none of that crap. You know?
Now, to end on tonight, do you think that it's possible that giants are still roaming the earth, just hidden somewhere, probably maybe by elite secret societies, or have they all been killed off?
I don't know. I've heard a few stories, man. Supposedly in the Solomon Islands, also in Afghanistan. I know in some remote parts of Iraq. I actually was on a radio program once, and one of the soldiers called in, and he was giving his story about it, and it was pretty convincing. I mean, it makes sense that, you know, a lot of things. I mean, dinosaurs supposedly died, but we got lizards and crocodiles, and I mean, so, you know, according to the false timeline history, who knows how old everything is anyways. So it's quite a possibility that some of these giants could have survived. I mean, it's rare, but why not, right? I mean, Bigfoot obviously survived. I mean, they still can't explain that, you know?
Definitely. And before you head out, is there any new books that you're working on? Anything else that that we should look forward to in the future?
I just wrote something about Epstein. So basically, the Secrets of Origin Island, unauthorized biography of Jeffrey Epstein, which was supposed to get published, but then the distributor said no, we can't do it, and the publisher backed out, and I was like, oh, so I just self-published. You know, so basically proved the point that certain things you can't talk about. But that's it. And then I think I have something on India, like some ancient aliens and giants in India. Should be coming out at some point, and basically working on movies, trying to get movies made, and you know, that's kind of what.
These documentary films or?
Yeah, everything. I've written, you know, feature-length films. I have documentary stuff that we want to do, and you know, I'm involved in certain treasure hunting things that, you know, historical stuff that, you know, we'll probably make documentaries on those as well. So I just kind of want to do everything. I just want to be filming. You know, I'm kind of done with the book writing. It's so bad now. The censorship is so bad. I don't even want to. Like, it's, you know, obviously fiction's dead. You can't really write that, and I can't anyways. I'm blackballed, so it wouldn't even matter. Like my dream of writing a great American novel died a long time ago. So I mean, it's not even a thing now. I mean, right? So people don't even read, and everything that they want to read is just factory written nonsense. You know, all that James Patterson crap or whatever. You know, it's. I mean, Stephen King hasn't written anything good. I mean, since he stopped doing cocaine, basically. So this is nothing, man. I mean, it's you know, thankfully there's so much that's already been written, and so many great classics, and so much stuff that you don't know about yet that could kind of keep us, you know, keep us going on. Because I mean, has music as well. I mean, there's so much great music that, you know, we just haven't heard yet. You know, stuff from the '70s, and you know, weird freaking. Like Rick Wakeman solos from what was that? He played for Yes, right? He was a keyboardist for Yes, but he has some solo albums that are just like crazy prog rock. You know, just cool stuff. I mean, there's so much. The point is, like, there's so much more to discover.
Definitely, there's always something more to discover out in the world. And Xaviant, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us tonight. There's much more we could talk about, so I'll have to have you back on soon.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, and anytime, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Have a great night.